So to do this, what I'm going to do is draw around this onto my Peltex and then just cut it out. And I want the fusible down, the rough side down, and then that's going to stick to my backing. If I'm going to use a very light fabric and draw around here with this fairly dark Sharpie, this could show through a white fabric. Now, ideally, when I cut this out, I should be cutting off almost all of the Sharpie. So, but still, if there's some there, it could show through your fabric around the edges there. So you might want to watch that. Neither of my fabrics are very light, so I don't have those worries with this leaf. The green batik is my leaf front, and this colorful batik is my backing. Now, I'm only making one, and these pieces of fabric are pretty generous. To make a batch, we'll want to be a bit more frugal. Because this stabilizer is so stiff, this construction is a bit odd. First thing we do is fuse the Peltex to the wrong side of our backing. So this is the rough side. And I just want to say, you can kind of manhandle this. Don't think it's too delicate. It'll go back into its shape. Okay, so the rough side down, but I don't want to put my iron on this. I'm going to go over to the other side. I'm going to flip this over. I'm going to make sure that I'm going past it everywhere. And I'm going to press this with steam. You can use a press cloth if you want. We're just going to steam this on. It doesn't take that long, and we can steam it on better, but we may need to reposition. So right now we just get it on there. It looks pretty good. I've got at least 1/2 inch. We want at least 1/2 inch on all the edges. Once your positioning is correct, give it a big steam and get it really well attached. So this is pretty good here. These are 2 batiks, which isn't necessarily what I would normally do, but it's what I have that's appropriate colors, and so I'm doing it. And I've got these 2 fabrics right side to right side. It's not as important with a batik because they're pretty close on both sides, but right side to right side. And I'm just going to put in a few pins, not a lot, not near the edge, and it's just to keep this positioned properly as I stitch. And I'm not trying to go straight down and straight up. I'm really trying to go in at an angle and then up at an angle because this is so thick. And after I have this pinned like this, I am going to make sure it seems nice and flat on this side. It seems pretty good to me. So we're going to stitch from this side, and we're going to stitch a little bit bigger, 1/8 to 3/16 of an inch bigger. We're just going to give ourselves a little extra room to turn around that edge. And we're going to leave our hole for turning. And since I'm not using very light fabrics, I'm just going to go ahead. It's so easy to accidentally sew over your turning hole. And so I'm just going to mark this. In fact, I'm also going to trim back some of this fabric. Okay, so you can see that what I've done is I've cut this at an angle on the outside of my turning hole. And over here I've cut at an angle on the outside. And this is to kind of remind me when I get there, because I don't know how many times when I'm doing a bunch of something that I'll just stitch right past here and not even recognize what I'm doing. And so I like to do this to remind myself. This Peltex is so stiff that you're going to fight with it a little bit. And you might, if the throat of your machine isn't wide enough, you're going to hit it. You know, we can stitch around here, but as we're turning, we're going to smash into the throat of the machine. And so you're going to have to, fold it out of the way and stuff like that. So try not to poke yourself with any pins. We're going to start at one of these areas and we're going to back stitch. And then any of the very fussy areas like this inside corner, I like to take an extra stitch where I go this way, one stitch, and then up that way. We're going to try to leave an 1/8 to 3/16 of an inch. So I'm just going to go around and make sure that this is nice and flat here. I'm just going to stitch around. Now, if you have needle down, this is a good time to enjoy it. This is one of those times when patience is a virtue. Go as slow as you need to. Use as small and tight a stitch as you can stand. Pull pins as soon as you can. Take that extra stitch at the corners. Manhandle the Peltex to fold it out of your way as you go. Backstitch at your ends. This is a pretty complex shape. I wouldn't want to make 8 or a dozen of these. So here it is, and I've sewn all the way around. That's not my best work right there. I could go back and round that out. I think I will. I've taken an extra stitch at a bunch of these pointier areas. I didn't do it there. It's just a judgment call. It sometimes can help with the turning. I'm just going to re-round this one little area here. Nothing's permanent yet, so now's your chance to fix anything. Now I'm going to trim this, and the things that I want to do are cut across points like this. I want to cut an 1/8 to 3/16 away from the stitching, and any areas like this I want to really cut right in up to my stitching. But you basically want to trim everywhere at an 1/8 to 3/16 of an inch, and then clip into the inside points and clip off these kinds of points that stick out. Now this is using quilter's cotton, and it's a batik. It's fairly fine grained. If you're using something that's got a looser weave than quilting cotton, you really don't want to cut this close without double stitching. And then if you cut bigger, you would probably want to do some clipping your curves and stuff. If I cut way too close somewhere, I could trim this Peltex back. I could double stitch what was there, but you should try to fix that. If you cut like a 1/16 away, that's too close. That's gonna, I think, open up in the wash eventually. Okay, here I've done one that's pretty close. I'm going to go ahead and just really quick reinforce that with a second line of stitching. Just right over the top of the first one, maybe a little bit inside of it. If I wanted, I could even trim back my Peltex a little bit right there, because that's going to be a pretty tight fit. This will pull right off, and I could just trim this back just a hair so that it's a little better there. Okay, now I've got this, and here's the part where I say we're going to manhandle it. We don't want to push against these reinforced areas, and that's our main thing. And so we're going to do everything we can to reduce our needing to fuss later. So we want to prep some of these harder areas to turn in advance. And I have somewhere a proper turning tube, but I can't find the right size one. And so what I'm going to do is stick this pen cap in here, and I'm going to try to be careful not to wreck it. I'm just going to slip it in there. And then I'm going to use something like my bodkin and start shoving these pieces in there. And then I can pull the pen cap off. And I can do that same thing. If I had I have one of these that's bigger, and I used it the other day, and I don't know where it is now. I've got too many projects going at once. I've got the, you got to put the opening in the right, so it goes in like this. So I'm going to use my bodkin And I'm going to shove this in there. And I also am going to kind of poke. I also am going to kind of poke that in there if I can. I'll just do it like that. Get it poking in there. We can get it in there later, but if you can get it in now. So we're just going to get some of these harder. This is why you want your hand to go all the way in, and why you don't want to get too complicated. This is about as complicated as I would want to get with this. Now I'm going to shove this in here. Get this started. Okay. Move my pen cap off. I'm going to go over here. This is a fussy one. This is why I say I might be able to make 2 of these before losing my patience. And this isn't the kind of thing I would design to sell. This is too fussy. So I'm getting these all started just to make it so that life's easier later on. All right, get that shoved in there. Now this one's pretty fat. I'm not going to do that one. It'll be easier to turn by hand. Now, put your cap back on your pen. So here is where we're really going to manhandle this. We're not going to pussyfoot around. We're not going to put a lot of stress on this, but we're going to really crunch this thing. We're going to crunch it up. And we're going to make it do what we want. And so the first thing I want is to make all these points and this whole placemat come through here. And see how I'm not putting pressure on this opening. I'm just squishing this up so much. You know, I've always said turning is never pretty. This is as not pretty as turning gets. And you want to get this whole thing headed towards that opening. And then we're going to start letting it through. And we're continuing to not let a lot of pressure go on those points. This is the hardest part. Now I'm gonna air this at real speed so you can see how long it took me to do that. Okay, so now this part is just a bunch of fussing. It takes me longer than I show here because I've sped this up. I just work everything flat and position the stabilizer as carefully as I can. It's very helpful that these points are all already started, even if I have to ease the stabilizer into some of them. So I'm just going to start pressing this nice and flat using steam and work around until the whole thing is really nice. And I want to keep this colored fabric on the back side. I don't want to let it, so that's why I'm looking at the front to start. I want mostly green on the front. I like to fuse to the backing fabric because sometimes the fusible creates wrinkles that I don't want to see on my front. When we get to this area, this is where we're going to fold this around as close to a gentle curve as we can achieve, and we're going to press this down. Now, it should be attaching to the back side because you can steam through this Peltex, and it's going to get these little, whatever you call those, pleats in it, sort of like. And so we can come and we can work on this edge and get this edge as neat as you need it to be happy. Try to not put your iron on the Peltex. And then you want to do the same thing with this piece. Okay, so this has to get those same kinds of pleats in it. So I'm just gonna fold it and then steam it and then let it cool a smidge. Fold a little more, steam a little more. If you had the patience to just take this and stitch it with like a nice little ladder stitch or something, But I like to close mine by machine. And so I'm just gonna get this as good as I can, and then I'm gonna call it good enough.